Ooh, I like that.
I forgot about Andrew's, screen. Andrew, you also were just not allowed to be here last week. Is that right? Your computer, it just booted you every time you tried to be in?
Django hates me. That's the only reason why I didn't show up. Yeah.
It was 100% my fault. I kicked him out and couldn't figure out how to put him back in.
There's a whole subreddit of people who assume that same thing about themselves, Andrew. Django hates me.
Speaking of the subreddit, you got a little bit of love on the Grant Morrison subreddit for the Batman in Quarantine podcast.
That's true. There's a couple comments on there. Hopefully, I'm terrified of Reddit, so hopefully it doesn't turn sour in a heartbeat like everything seems to on Reddit.
It's gonna get banned.
I love the new facial hair mic. It looks amazing. Oh,
thank you. Yeah, I had to get rid of most of the quarantine beard. It was getting too much. So, yeah.
I can see that you could pull off an Archibald Chamberlain if you wanted to.
Yeah, I realized that it kind of turned into that with the way the mustache was sitting. But generally what I do is, once a year, I shave off all this, and then let it grow back in within a month.
It's your nihilistic post-apocalypse facial hair. I dig it. Yeah. Mike, it's interesting. I just mentioned to Django, I got a new bottle of scotch I'm excited about, but it's Buchanan's Deluxe. And it reminded me that for the first year and a half that we knew you, we had you under Catherine Buchanan's name.
True, yeah.
Yes. So, heiress to the Buchanan Deluxe blended scotch whiskey fortune, I imagine.
Well, did everybody do their homework?
Did everybody do their homework and everyone got their 2,000 word documents in? Because the cutoff was 1 minute ago, and I don't want anyone getting zero credit for that.
It's in your inbox right now.
Okay, good. Good. Win. I was just about to say I would be super bummed if we didn't have Win for the first volume out of the second hardcover. So thank goodness you're here.
Oh.
Setup issues. My previous setup was nope, not close enough to a power cord.
When
Creature on the move.
Your room gets cooler and cooler. Is that a bunch of toys? Are those statues? I'm into it.
Let me see your directions. This one I actually bought from you guys.
Nice.
At the enabling of one Colette.
Oh.
She was like, look, we have this beautiful Jenny Frizen Wonder Woman. And I was like,
I do remember that.
Wonder Woman, and I do love Jenny Frizen.
I enabled Colette to get 3 different statues this very day. So yeah, so one good turn deserves another. Yeah, Butcher on the move. Look at this.
Oh, where's a place I haven't?
It's a guerrilla book club.
Where haven't they seen?
Exactly. Have I done the stairs? I could sit in the stairs.
Needs to stop upping the game so I can stop moving. I gotta grab my phone because I was a usual and I bought it digitally.
Oh, nice.
Ooh, dun dun dun.
That third hardcover is gonna come out.
I own 2 copies of the same book physically.
Yeah.
I say as if I do not have plenty of duplicates over there.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody. I'm glad we got a couple more people here in the last 2 minutes. It is wonderful to have the East of West family all together for such an emotional, beat-filled volume. Like, what a volume.
Definitely
this is the
in
last
my top
one that
3.
I've actually read ahead of time.
Yeah, I know. So, Win, this is a totally new experience for you at this point.
So this one I had read.
Oh, you had.
Because it came out while I was still working at the shop, so I read a shelf copy. But
Okay.
Volume 8 will be completely new territory.
I'm
I have
excited
no
to be
idea
at
what's
that
going
spot.
on.
Excited.
I didn't really remember most of this one anyway. I just remembered the stuff with. I remembered that Wolf was not gone. Was really all I remembered.
Spoiler alert. We'll be talking about
gone?
the story. That's a good question. Is he not gone?
I don't. It's
Is
not
he really
clear to
himself
me
anymore?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. I mean, he has moments of clarity, but I can't be sure that he has full control.
I thought that was a really fun first issue of this volume because, it's definitely started where you're like, oh man, that message prophet is here to ruin our day again. And I actually had to like reread that issue after finishing the volume to just make sure that like I understood, like, wait, was there a battle? Were people mad? Or like then things got resolved, or why had they come to the gates in the first place? And that was one thing I did have to reread. But I thought that was like a very, very cathartic moment, especially because there is a very sad death in this volume. So I needed a lot of positive buoying before I got there.
So is my mic working? Are these
Yeah.
new
Yes.
headphones? Okay. If we were to find out that Wolf is in more control than we're led to believe, how will they explain that away? Like, what about his character or creation or something will allow that?
Do people feel like he's maybe not in control?
I
Not
think
entirely,
he is
but
generally in control,
but-
but he is being carried by the word, and that's a very
Well,
vague.
is he being carried by the messenger? Is he carrying the message?
Exactly, but there's the way that the word is talked about a lot by its adherents, kind of it's fatalism. It's both can be the same thing.
So I don't know that I thought that Ezra was being controlled by the word. I think that he got the power and he was just kind of like he had that in him the whole time.
Yeah.
Why would the word be controlling Wolf? I could see it maybe affecting his perspective more than anything if he
Like
understands everything more.
Like a bad burrito affects you and puts you in a bad mood because you got the old squirties. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, that is like running. Oh, no pun intended.
I mean, Ezra was
running you.
definitely running his mouth at the end there, and that's what got him eat.
That
Yeah.
was
True. Yeah.
that was such a good flashback scene as well.
Well, 'cause-
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
like, there's some parts of it that make me a little uncomfortable. It definitely, in some ways, kind of feels like almost echoing like a rape scene to me.
The actual
between
battle.
the actual battle, like that last bit, like just the expression on Wolf's transformed face, and a lot of what Ezra or whatever he's calling himself is
Ryan.
like, yeah, all like a lot of his dialogue makes me like you don't feel bad when he gets eaten. Like
No.
he very quickly becomes a very unrelatable character. Which
Ezra did.
yeah, like
Yeah.
like I mean, he was already kind of on that downward
for sure.
slide, but like he very quickly in the last few pages, like, oh yeah, no, like I feel 0% bad that you just got eaten by the person I was like the first time I read volume six actively crying that they had died. So
No, I'm totally with you. I'd kind of written off Ezra in the previous volume of just sort of like not morally not able to come back from where he had really gone in my mind.
It was disgusting seeing him attached to the tentacle like that.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, I thought so. One thing that I think is interesting about that scene, and something that I hadn't really noticed yet, is that our flashbacks are changing when they can take place, because that scene is a muted black's flashback, and just one issue ago it was the present.
Right.
So we have like a constantly shifting paradigm for where flashbacks can be happening.
yeah.
You know,
Admittedly,
any time before the moment.
Yeah, like admittedly there is like some amount of story gap between the end of volume 6 and volume 7, like there seems to always be, but yeah, it definitely is. Like I think this is the sorry, I just read your guys's like it definitely feels like a change to how this, like relatively speaking, this is our most recent flashback.
Yeah. And so we're in Apocalypse year 3, right? And the previous issue was
the end of year 2.
The end of year 2. Okay.
And then there was those couple pages at the very end that were like a postscript.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And we got those wily Apocalypse twins, those wily horse buddies, at the very beginning of this, which again, like we've really gotten pretty sparse bits of the old apocalypse trio in the last like 2 volumes. It's interesting. I
mean-
feel like that's going to come back big.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we see many of the excuse me. I don't think we see much of the Horsemen at all in this volume.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel, I mean, I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, but I definitely feel like there were analogs of the Horsemen very clearly shown. Like the terrorist that crashed the building into the White Tower was shaded very red in that scene and looked almost identical to the feminine nature that we've been describing War as.
Yeah, she does
Interesting.
definitely look a lot like War that we see in the flashbacks.
And there is definitely a lot of mentioning of the words, like at least war is talked about as a concept, but almost in like a personified way at times in this particular volume.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of ties to a bit of like, I mean, we've talked about before where we tried to discern whether it's just the art style that's causing the similar looks or if it's genuinely intentional.
I was just
And
about to ask that, Will.
I was
Yeah.
starting to get into the camp of just like that's the art style, but now you're making me ask questions again if it is intentional or not. I guess we'll find out soon enough.
I was
Intentional if you choose it to be.
yeah.
I don't know.
Just like even on the second page when we are hanging out with the old horsemen, the statement, look, we're agents of the apocalypse, we need to fulfill the promise of mankind's imaginary fears.
Mm-hmm.
That conversation took a slightly different light on just the nature of the apocalypse, which I feel like we've talked about in previous book clubs of just like what is this apocalypse, like is it the end of the world or was it, but they sort of even reference mankind's imaginary fears. To hell with blue skies and idyllic scenery, I'm ready to go. It made me wonder, like, what are they viewing as their role in this, and how seriously do they take this idea of an apocalypse, or what is it?
Yeah, that's a question I asked about the president, and she looked a lot like one of the other ones way
Right.
back in the first or the second volume. So I was trying to think of like, you tying war and this actions of this character to that. I'm trying to think of which character it was, which horseman it was, and what kind of actions the president has, and does that tie to that particular horseman?
It was the green one, right? Is green
I
Conquest?
thought it was Conquest. Isn't Conquest blue?
Famine?
Maybe.
Famine
Maybe I'm
or something? She looks very sickly.
She was
Oh.
trying to look like the look was very much when she was like when we had that visual connection between the president and Conquest, is previous form like that. I think that's what's
Yeah.
being referenced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, your mic volume seems really low if you're trying to say
I'm
something.
muted. Sorry.
There you go. Okay, I was
Completely.
gonna say I could use a little bit more mic sounds.
Yeah. Sorry. First thing I was saying was I think the green one is famine.
Okay.
Famine. It's one of either famine or pestilence is missing, and
I think in here
Uh,
it's called famine. You're right.
yeah. So famine doesn't really say a lot. It hasn't had much of a chance to shine yet, even though she's on the cover of this one.
Right.
But the what we're saying there, yes, the previous iteration of, or the previous manifestation of Conquest, you're right, did look a lot like the president in terms of like scale and hair and general character design.
So
Well,
the
and it's
Go
good
ahead.
to see that we have Clint Eastwood as the man with no name right here, also on page 2.
Yeah.
Hey, so when the horsemen, this scene here, what battle did the horsemen come across here? It's they've
Going
been
from the south, right?
Yeah, I
Where
think
am
that's the remains of Texas, maybe.
okay, and it
I
says
thought
like
that they
scouts
were.
had done it.
Yeah. Let me look at that page again.
Because it looks like a Confederate soldier, like the hood and stuff. And they said they'd been ambushed by scouts, and I was like, wasn't that like volumes ago?
Maybe 2 ago. Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah.
There's still people hanging out, dying on the battlefield.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because there is one. Wow, it couldn't have been long ago. Because there's one still alive sitting there.
He could have been sitting there dying for a really long time.
He
when
was
I had
thirsty.
when I had read it, I had took it as the warpath that had been left by, Wolf's army or whatever. That's the way I had read it as. But
Timeline wise, that looks a lot
Same.
better. If you're right.
because they had just shown Boer and like very limited, but they showed the creature and the army show up without showing who was in charge.
Yeah.
And so that's the impression that I got too, is that it was the devastation that he brought.
Because that's a lot of people walking through that.
Yeah.
Walking through the desert.
Jeff, you mentioned the quote, mankind's imaginary fears. We don't know, we don't have a catalyst for the apocalypse, but I always just kind of assumed that there wasn't one necessarily, that it just is like it's the apocalypse is coming just because it is. But that either I misunderstood something in the first place, or that surprises me, because saying the imaginary fears of men makes it sound like there isn't a catalyst, and then it's just like a choice that they're making because people are generally scared of the apocalypse. Because saying imaginary fears of mankind seems contrary to the whole idea that everything is purposeful, laid out.
Maybe the horseman knows something we don't know, and
Yeah,
that
that
is that the
was-
message is something that people just kind of fell for hook, line, and sinker.
That's what I'm guessing, because the inevitability of the message is its strongest trait right now. But that imaginary thing makes it seem like it can't, it obviously won't be, right?
Well, it's. I was thinking about that as well, and my kind of read of it was, yeah, but I'm not like, because previously he's saying, but I'm not like these hysterical maniacs screaming about the end times every time a dark cloud dots the horizon. My expectations are perfectly tempered, and that's italicized. That is, he knows his nature, he knows the expectations of his role, and that is not bound by mankind's expectations of that. Except he's saying we need to fulfill the promise of mankind's imaginary fears. But he's at the same time saying he's ready to go.
It
So
almost
if there is going to be an apocalypse. It's but mankind probably has all the details wrong. They're jumping at shadows.
I feel like the horsemen have a different idea of what the apocalypse really is versus what humanity does, and they're sort of putting on a show in the march towards this event so that everyone will sort of have their imaginary fears fulfilled, but in reality they sort of know that some other thing might happen. But I feel like it's the first time we've gotten an inkling that there is a discrepancy in terms of the apocalypse, maybe between those who know what it is or don't know what it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I just can't remember another time where we had an idea to maybe really like sort of doubt what this idea of the apocalypse is outside of just the uncertainty of it.
Well, it ties in with something I was going to say though about Ezra / Orion /
dog food.
The word, dog, but wolf. In that, he kind of fell into, his downfall in a way was due to him. He consumed the word and therefore became the word. So then he started believing that anything he said was the word. He was deviating from the original word because he was the word, and whatever he said must, by definition, be prophecy or the law or however he saw it in himself. And that's why he started gathering everybody to become the new chosen. Whoa. And so on. But now Wolf has consumed the word and become the word, and that's the kernel that is the remainder of the original written word. And Wolf seems like he's less likely to be, dictating. He seems to be more going with the flow of things.
Well, he was more stable to begin with, too.
That too, yeah, definitely.
Do we have any reason to think that he's going to be different than Orion in that, like, John chapter 1, verse 1, like, I am the word type thing that you were talking about? I mean,
I feel like...
I think he has the mental fortitude to
is
keep
that
up.
what it is? He just, like, rolled charisma and was fine?
I think the telling thing with this is his conversation with Crow right after the flashback. And he does show doubt. The first thing he says in that conversation is, "Are you sure?" When Crow says, "I'm sorry." And then the next page, the first thing he says is, "I never expected any of this." He's not he hasn't consumed the word, then gone, okay, I am the Messiah, and I am going to lead us all to our wonderful apocalypse.
Well, I mean, then
didn't-
that's kind of the classic. A lot of stories have a good leader who doesn't want to be the leader. Like,
Yeah, and then he literally says, I don't want it.
yeah, and probably my favorite line in the whole book was when the next thing she says, which is, "If only this was a time of wants."
Right.
I related to that this week.
Yeah. The difference in my mind between Wolf and Ezra is that Ezra has like an amount. I mean, everyone has damage, but Ezra had an amount of damage that like he was trying to compensate for. It seemed like it's kind of the idea of like the people who should have power the least are the people who want power, and he seemed like someone who was trying to have power and trying to have order and make up for all of these things, sort of seek clarity and have control. Whereas Wolf, to me, doesn't seem to demonstrate that. So I would trust what Wolf does because he doesn't seem like someone necessarily who's motivated by being in power to therefore have the power.
Don't you feel like they're pushing his lucidity kind of hard though, like to set us up for something different? I don't
He
know.
seems like
Maybe.
a lucid dude.
I
mean,
would
He is a
expect
lucid
that.
cannon.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
You're welcome, Win.
Wynn's cackle was the exact amount that we all knew was coming.
On a side note, what did you guys think of those flesh stairs?
Oh
The-
yeah, I was trying to wrap my head around that for.
The tongue thing.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Oh god, it's not tongues. It is. It's just flesh mounds.
It's like a spiral of the tongue going down.
When you can't make us think about that the whole call until we talk about it. Don't
I don't know what you're talking about.
I loved that conversation.
I have one last question about the Wolf situation. Do you think that he ate Ezra knowing in that very moment that he was going to become the Word? Or do you think it was just like, God, this guy sucks, I'm going to eat him?
I think it was defense. Yeah.
I think it was instinct.
I
Yeah,
mean,
an
like
instinct.
it seems so like the build up to when he eats him is just like so uncalculated looking. It's just like Ezra's going on and on and on about like no final words to utter, and then you got too close. What? And then no.
I want you to
Classic
read the
James
whole
Bond
book to me
villain.
next time.
I mean,
and like Mike said, he says, I never expected any of this. He doesn't want it.
Yeah.
Couldn't he have known though what happens when you eat it?
Oh yeah,
Like,
I mean,
didn't
I
he-
knew that I was going to be in trouble when I, punched that guy at a bar one time, but I did it anyway because
He didn't punch a guy at a bar.
Did you tell the cop you didn't expect what was gonna happen?
I mean, it's something you get wrapped up in the moment sometimes. Sometimes you eat an Ezra.
Good
Well,
wisdom.
I think
we do things and we don't know what the consequence is going to be, but we do it anyway.
But like part of me thinks about like when Ezra ate the word, like what does the practical act of eating this written paper do? Like it doesn't necessarily do anything unless
Right.
Ezra is now saying that it means something.
Right.
So we don't actually have any reason to believe that anything happened to Wolf by eating this guy outside of the fact that he believed that because he had eaten paper, he had he was, something larger than he had been.
Well, all it did was fulfilled the word. It's literally a self-fulfilling prophecy. He ate the word and therefore became the word.
Mhm.
Therefore, he believed anything he then said was also the word. Bearing in mind that that's all the word is supposed to be, just a vague description of how the apocalypse is going to unfold.
It's the message is dead. Long live the message, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
it's like succession from one person to another now, as long as you eat each other.
Which,
And there's quite a bit of changing of powers in this volume.
I think this volume had some of the most elegant storytelling in the series yet, in terms of the way like time was passed and the way that information was given to us, the reader, like being on different sides of phone calls at different times, or
That was
like
awesome.
when we got the like summarization of when Xiaolin called Chamberlain, but the second time, and it was just the 8 small panels of like all of the key beats of that conversation. And I am bummed out about how much I love reading Archibald Chamberlain as a character.
Yeah.
Oh.
He is so much fun to
incredible.
read.
The dialogue is so on point. Like,
Yeah.
Hickman knows that character and how much that character is defined by his voice and his language. That it's spot on every single time, and you can hear it in your head in that sort
So
of
good.
charming southern.
Hickman being Southern definitely helps
Yeah.
there. You know?
Yeah, that's true. It also has elements of like his Doctor Doom to me. Like one of the things I love so much about Hickman's Doctor Doom is the way it's written. And I feel like there's a sort of similarity of the area of Hickman's brain that the voice for those characters comes from.
Yeah, 'cause
You
they're both
definitely see
characters that-
God Emperor Archibald becoming a thing.
Yeah.
Probably what he wants, honestly.
Yeah, well, they're both characters that are both kind of so strongly defined by the way they speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're just some really impressive stuff. And even this second issue, I think, man, the second issue was so cool. The statement of like the terrorists, I love the woman just whatever she said to the effect of like, have you ever died for something you believed in? And you're just like, what is this scene? Like, this is okay. Is this train gonna crash into this building? Oh, she's gonna stay. Like, it was just I loved the insanity of that moment. And there's like also, airplane train. What an amazing architectural design.
And also like it's such a classic like Western trope of the train heist.
Yep.
Just instead of, like robbing the train, they took the train.
And dropped it.
Yeah.
And robbed it. And this is true.
Yeah, I really like it felt like that. And I think this came out before the Han Solo movie did. I'm sure it was in his brain
It
before the
reminded
Han
me a
Solo
lot of
movie,
that.
but it's really similar to that scene. And just like the first time you see the train, I was like, oh, that's cool. It just kind of hovers. And then the last time you see the train, I was like, oh, it's not hovering anymore. This is gonna be rad.
Like that
Yeah.
is such
Yeah.
an awesome page.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so good.
This like it's spiraling down towards the tower.
Could you all
I-
tell me? Or sorry, Andrew, go or whoever that
Well,
was.
I have a quick question for Django. Did that like big bulky dude with the mustache and the cigarettes look kind of familiar to you?
Are you saying I'm a big bulky dude? Who...
No.
That was a Django response.
In
though.
Frank Miller's Elektra, one of the main characters
Oh,
is
yeah.
this
Thinking
dude,
Frank Miller.
and he looks.
Yeah.
I swear to God, he based him on this.
Yeah, John Garrett.
Yeah.
Yes, John Garrett. Here's another one of
Yeah, and that guy actually
like
stands
mop
out.
hair.
Like he doesn't look like he's from this story.
No.
Also, like
yeah.
there's nobody else who's quite shaped like him in the
Right.
book. Like he's got that big square head.
Yeah,
Big square
exactly.
head, very narrow, dark eyes, that triangle of a mouth. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's- yeah. You're my thought actually when I was seeing that was that looks more like a Frank Miller character than a.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
Yeah, but I loved that page and how the first page where you're meeting that cell of resistance fighters, because it did what I loved in the last issue of the previous volume as well, which was introducing some new characters very quickly and making them seem interesting just by showing them interact with each other. That is such a good device to make to introduce new characters and make them seem real and make the world seem more populated.
Is at the beginning of this issue and the beginning of that sequence when we have the flashback of the president going and talking to is that the same scene that we saw like 3 volumes ago?
Yeah,
okay, so it's the same
when
people.
when she like killed a bunch of protesters.
Okay.
Like, it's the same conversation of like are they all this young? They're skewing that way, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
How great like callbacks. His callbacks in this volume are just on point. He's doing some great like I have all of these circles mapped out and now we're moving back here. And
Well,
like,
even the wolf flashback was like that. We
Yeah.
saw parts of that from a distance.
right. It's just this one
Albeit
was
with
longer
4
ago.
fewer
Yeah.
volumes in between it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
I mean,
to-
even this.
Go ahead.
So this callback got called back too, because when the terrorist, the red terrorist, is preaching to the followers, she uses the phrasing that was used by the president that we just got called back to. And to start and do that, to make us, I feel like I've said this exact thing during our East of West book club before, or maybe just in a conversation with somebody about Hickman. It's that he makes a scene that is so good on its own that it's memorable. And that was the president shooting them and leaving the one alive. And you're like, dang, this is a good comic. And you might go tell somebody about that, be like, this is a good comic. Yet it kind of almost only was used to call back to later. And then in that same volume, that same callback had a callback on it. And it's like he just uses these puzzle pieces that are so strong that don't just act as puzzle pieces. And this whole volume was filled with that. I took more photos of my book in this volume than I have of any volume that we've read in this whole book club. I have like 7 references that I was like, oh, that's a cool thing. And I usually get like 2 or 3 that I'm like really need to talk about. It was awesome.
Yeah, I think for that flashback as well, that we're seeing, you know, most of that flashback right up to the point that it ended the previous time, which is with their phrase, "Why waste the bullet?" And the first time you see that, it's just kind of like, oh, that's a, you know, cold thing that, you know, tells you a lot about that character, and it's cool.
This is why you should have wasted the bullet.
And now we're seeing consequences and the answer to that question. Yeah,
That's Chekhov's bullet.
Yeah.
Used.
Just once again, like, there's going to be a consequence to this action. You don't know what it's going to be,
Yeah.
but you do it anyway.
Will, you had
just as I have a minor quibble about this particular issue, which was I loved the callback and I loved seeing the one girl that you know, didn't get killed. I thought that was awesome. But I had the trouble getting excited about the middle section. Maybe it was just me, but I felt like some of the middle action didn't do a lot for me. Like, it was a couple pages of characters that I had no familiarity with no real ties to who or where they were, and comparing them to, I think it was issue 22, where like that action felt intense. And I was like, you know, every page turn, I was excited to see what was next. I didn't feel that on this. The result was cool, and the beginning of it was cool. And then just a couple of pages of, I don't know who these guys are. I don't know why I should care about them. I don't know why they're shooting and killing at each other. And then, okay, there's the payoff for it. But I don't know. It felt like it could have been cut short, or, you know, because even the character that we had a tie to, she wasn't here. So it was just a bunch of characters that we were completely unfamiliar with this. And I felt like I even had that same struggle a little bit later with the really cool gunfight with Chamberlain, with this another character that they kind of brought in, and we didn't really have a whole lot of info. So it was hard for me to buy into some of that action. I don't know anything about these characters.
I had the thought, you know, a couple pages, and I'm between you and Mike on this. I do think that, like, I would prefer this type of an introduction to a character than like a sort of long-winded explanation or expositional thing. But I did have the thought while reading this issue, like, I don't know if my brain can quite fit this many new people. Like in that issue, it was like, oh, there's like 5 people here. Like, I can track this, but I'm delicately balancing like whose motivations or what, and who's politically tied to which nation. And I got the feeling of like, I'm a little worried that I won't be able to fully grasp these characters. And I think that it worked well because they were kind of self-contained to the one issue for the most part.
Yeah.
the one scene even.
And then there was, even with that, the introduction of that, it was more of some of the character modeling being very similar characters, like this person screaming about the gun having the exact same face of this person here.
I was just going to say, it looks like the pilot.
Back and forth and go, okay, well, this person has a jacket on and this doesn't. Otherwise, they look exactly the same.
Yeah, you're right.
So it just kind of felt a little, I don't know, comparing it to what came before it, it didn't do the same thing for me. That's my little quibble.
For me, because I definitely understand that. The way that I felt connected to the characters, and maybe it's just my brain making associations, but for one, it was that John Garrett, because he looked kind of familiar, I just kind of associated him with that character. And even like I had said earlier, the way that the Mohawk person looks so much like War in that previous incarnation. I just because of the mohawk and like the tough stature, like I just immediately was like that. And then not only that, but the leader has those dark, because of the cap, has the dark circles that makes her look a lot like Doma Lux. And so that gave me the impression that maybe they're being influenced by Doma Lux, or I mean, it could be Chamberlain. I don't know, but that's where I was just trying to think about that in my head.
I think that just from what we know about how much this story respects the rabble, I think that these people being completely disposable for the story kind of tracks. Like we haven't seen anybody who doesn't have some amount of power, who isn't just kind of used as a pawn.
That's true, Django.
These people are used as a pawn too.
It tapped into also, like, when you earlier volumes of this book club, you had mentioned sort of a lot of the focus is the high up stuff and not a lot of on the ground stuff. But this whole issue actually is kind of like what you had talked about, of like, we're kind of getting a inside view of these, you know, revolutionaries.
I
can appreciate that take.
You'd get in each Star Trek franchise where they don't focus on the bridge crew and instead focus on a bunch of random people in engineering or something.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I have a support of you, Will, in why this feels weird.
Thank
I did
you.
not feel it, okay, at the time, but I did feel a different thing that I think is going to explain part of why this didn't work. Because we're in volume 7 of 9, 7 of 10?
7 of 10.
7 of 10.
Okay, so 70% of the way. We are not right now, like, okay, Brubaker's Daredevil, like Mr. Fear pops up like 70% of the way through the story. I didn't feel like, what is this? It's comics. Like, people show up in an issue. People come and go. Like, you have an issue that is literally about one thing, and then it's on to something else with a different setting, different characters, anything like that. This book, as I'm reading this, the reason sometimes why it's hard to get back into it is it doesn't even feel like a season of a TV show. It feels like one movie. The entire thing is in a whole 45 issue movie, and that's very different than the rest of how we do comics. The breaks in them are not breaks. This volume is not about anything that the other volumes are not about, technically speaking. Maybe some characters aren't there, but like, you could pick up the first volume of Ms. Marvel, The New Normal, and it's like, oh, that's about like her kind of meeting Wolverine and like doing the whole Terrigen Mist thing. And then the next volume is about something else. And these aren't really about anything in particular. Like, his white pages don't really tie each arc. There's no story arcs. And that's cool, but it means that it's not as conducive to coming up with 5 new characters, because they're not able to sit within an arc. They're not sitting within any predefined walls. They just are a part of a 22-hour movie that we're 75% of the way out through.
Well, listen, he needed to crash a train into the tower,
Sure.
and he didn't want to kill anybody that he has plans for later.
I mean, he did set this up, like, what was that, like 3 or 4 volumes ago, when he let the
I
person
guess
get
that's
away.
true. We did know them. You're right. But
Like,
it
but
feels
we knew
like,
the one person.
Yeah.
The thing that
And
did
the
kind of
dead
have me
ones.
confused occasionally during the heist, and even on the first page when they're all being introduced, is, and I realize exactly what it is now, it's that this cell seems to essentially be Charlie's Angels. It's one old guy and like 4 young women. It's
I wouldn't put it past Hickman to be doing his own take on Charlie's Angels. In the future.
I liked I loved in issue 3. So 2 things, this flashback that started on. I loved that we saw the Horsemen, and there's in shadowed, it looked like maybe it was Death, but actually it was Belle Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Was that everyone's read? I'm curious.
In the flashback?
Yeah.
I didn't even notice it, but I see what you're talking about.
Because there is what looks like Death. He's wearing the hat and he's got like a jacket. But then when we get to the next page, we don't actually ever see Death in this scene, but we then see Belle, and he's wearing a hat and a jacket. Maybe it's inconsequential. It could have been Death, and he just wasn't drawn there. But
Well, I think he's got a beard there, just like Belle Solomon.
well, hold on, because we're talking about the next
So,
issue now.
I assumed it was
first
Death.
I assume
personally.
that's Death as well, because what I'm seeing here is first page is the 4 horsemen arriving and removing the eyes from the Oracle.
Yeah, and that
Oh,
like
okay. I thought it was one
Poncho's
long
jacket
scene.
They're
thing.
delivering
Yeah.
the
Cool.
eyes.
I
to
thought it
the
was one
chosen.
scene, but yep, there's a that's a different scene.
Because yet again, I feel like this is a callback to something in a previous volume when like we first meet the Oracle and we find out like how she lost her eyes. I guess
Yeah,
I don't
the
think
first-
we've seen that panel before, but I feel like the setup for that panel was in a previous volume.
I think the first panel we've seen that, you know, her under those sheets and looking like that, that's at least familiar.
I would need to take a look back on it, but yeah, I was just confused about how much time had spaced between those first 2 pages.
Yeah.
But
the main
I
thing is
really-
that Poncho does not look like Balsamine's jacket.
Yeah, no, that's why I didn't think it was, and then I thought like maybe it was an intentional red herring because then on the next page it's clearly Belle Solomon, just a
Mhm.
kind of similar outfit. But the
That's
whole
too
scene,
spelt.
yeah, you're right. No, yeah.
A red herring, like writing pork fried rice on the wall.
Did
Instead
that
of
happen
Zara and R.
somewhere? Oh,
No.
oh, right, yeah, you could Batman. But I love this, just the little bit of explanation as to why they shoved this eyeball on this dude's head and sort of who that is and like the brutality
I'm
of that
sorry.
scene.
Did you say an eyeball or did you say an unfettered feckless organ?
I also love the fact that we've gotten the word feckless 2 times in this book.
I had to read the explanation of the eyeballs a couple of times.
I still don't
Yeah.
understand how Chamberlain's eyeball works, in all honesty.
I don't either, but I was glad we
think I've
have the
pretty much figured
explanation
it
to have Mike explain to us.
Mike, get it.
Oh, okay. So, well, are we wanting to? I was assuming it was going to come up because it ties in with lots of other stuff with Chamberlain that happens in this issue and in the subsequent issues as well.
Teach us, teacher.
Okay, so what we're getting in the description, and we got this description in a previous volume as well, that the one for answers, to learn things hidden, one for questions, though the asking brings death. One for answers is given to the hunter, and that is, that kind of works more or less how we expect it from the idea of the eye of an oracle. It knows things, it sees things that are normally hidden, and it aids in the hunter's work. The other one, because it was called, one for questions, though the asking brings death, and they're all kind of like, well, I don't want it, but Chamberlain ends up taking it because
he doesn't give a
while you're
shit.
figuring it out, maybe I could hold on to it for you, he says. And then we go on to the meeting of him and the leader of the kingdom. I forget the name of it.
John's dad.
And this story comes out that he used, nobody really talks about it, and very few people know it, but he was this reputed gunfighter, the most deadly gunfighter that ever lived, kind of thing. And then in subsequent pages, we're seeing him, shooting and killing a bunch of people, but
Just
the eyes
shooting
fixed
like
onto
him.
Right, just
Bad
waving it
man.
around, and the bullets are just arcing and hitting.
Yeah.
Like Wanted.
It's exactly what I thought of. It was hard to follow where they were going, but it was cool
they all
and
go
chaotic.
into. That's the thing. They're starting in different positions, but they all end up hitting Judge. What's his face? So
It does kind of look like he's casting like magic missile or something.
exactly, because
Yeah.
effectively he is. But here's why that works, and I think the stories about him being a deadly gunfighter are a pure fabrication. They're a lie. He can't shoot for
He
tall
definitely
people.
got that vibe right away. I was like, he feels not like he's actually true. He just built up his legend.
Exactly,
So I'm
because that's the
loving
kind
it.
of thing that he does.
Cool.
But with the eye, which our quote about that eye is one for questions, though the asking brings death. Every time he shoots someone with that gun with the eye attached to it, it's after the target has asked the question.
No.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go straight to hell, you son of a bitch? And then
Question mark.
just
Bam, bam,
remember,
bam.
I did offer. Yeah, question mark, bang, bang, bang. And then later on, the next time he shoots it,
Would you
It's
like to
after-
know what I do with the heads of men who lie?
That's awesome because it plays
Oh
to
my
Chamberlain's
gosh.
strength, which is just kind of delaying until he has an advantage. So he
Exactly.
can have a conversation with you until he can kill you with the eyeball.
Or he can twist the conversation to a point where, it's
You have to ask a question.
mhm.
You guys remember back
Topper's
before
weapon.
the internet when you used to go to like GameStop and you'd buy like the guide for the new like Bloodborne game or the Pokemon game or something?
Mhm.
But then the internet happened.
Mike wrote all
Mike
of those.
should sell himself, even with the internet, to help us enjoy all of our favorite things.
So when he accidentally, so does Chamberlain accidentally shoot his niece?
Oh, that's something I hadn't really.
And then
Mm,
I don't see
I had just
her
assumed that
asking a
the
question.
widow shot her,
Same,
but
but
Well, I
that's
thought
really-
he accidentally did it.
Did she
I-
ask a
because-
question?
Well,
I'm
he
looking.
has.
I'm looking up.
He shoots 4 times, and she doesn't ask a question. But there's only 3. No,
There's the gun is also being shot by one
There
of
are
the
4
people he's
shots
shooting
fired.
right here.
Oh, there's
This
4
gun is
shots,
also
it's
being
chaos.
fired.
yeah, but he takes 4 shots. 3 go into heads, but then a pair of glasses fall down as well. So we
That
can
was
That was from the
main
assassin.
Yeah, that's the
assassin.
assassin.
right. That's what I'm saying. So his 4 shots are all accounted for. So he didn't shoot his niece.
yeah, because we see the niece coming. I don't even think she says anything in that scene.
Right. No, that's why I was curious because she doesn't pose a question. But my first time reading through this, I thought maybe he accidentally shot her in the chaos, but his 4 shots are actually accounted for.
So why is he able to shoot all 4 of the people who are approaching him when only one of them
I was
asks him a
just
question?
thinking that as well. Well, it's the answer brings, the asking brings death. It doesn't specifically
Sure.
say one person's death.
Yeah, or maybe the guns it answers a question with death. It doesn't need to specifically be answering the question to the singular person answering it. It's more like an answer is the overall statement of a
It also
paragraph.
brought
instead
to
of a sentence.
mind Fragrach from Celtic myth. That was a
Sure. Get-
sword that translates as the answerer. That's its name.
That
Yeah,
one's a little
the-
bit more direct. I like that.
One thing that I do have with that couple of panels, like it's clearly at least like 2 people there. Looks like it might be more like 4, but the positioning is really unclear in that scene.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, I had to read it
where
twice.
where all are they standing in this hangar?
Is
like-
this? I had jumped us ahead. Are you still talking about that end scene
Yeah,
where she
like
dies?
right here. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
Yep.
don't really understand where they're all standing in this room. Like obviously someone is throwing the heads, but
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
supposed
I
to be all
think-
happening like in a spotlight, dramatically surrounded by darkness, but the panel
Yeah.
layout doesn't really help with that impression.
Well, I think Dragotta's character design in general is even just like how Andrew's been talking a lot about that one red terrorist looking a lot like War. Maybe it's purposeful, but to be honest, there's just not a lot of differentiation between people's faces here and general parts about them. So
yeah. Well, we know from the scene where the last widow is, or the first widow, whatever, is delivering those heads from Japan. That there's her, and then she has 3 lackeys.
Mm-hmm.
So like there is 4 of them. It's just like, I guess like with the frame where he's firing, maybe you can kind of guess that there's like 1 in each direction because it seems
Yeah.
like that's where the bullets are going. But before that, like it's a little unclear where everyone's standing.
It's overnight heads from Japan.
Fast and Furious. Very good. Issue 3 had like, was it 3 or issue 4, but where the widow goes and saves Doma. I had to like reassess like, okay, well, can someone tell me why it was important to have the widow have her message interrupted and walk into the mechanical horse and then have to re-record the message? I was confused. Is it just to say simply like, oh, here's the steed that you will ride to go save Doma? Or that was one part that I was a little bit confused on the flow of.
Same here. I would be okay if it was literally just a thing that an artist put in to make us like notice, or to just be a thing that kind of like pauses us. But it doesn't. That doesn't seem to fit with the Hickman Dragotta combo. So I
Tough,
was
'cause
looking
she's-
for something more.
She starts crying and then donks right on into the horse. And then we, hear what the message she left was. But it was just an interesting pacing point in my mind.
I had the same thought. I was like, "What is this?" I reread it a couple times. I was like, did I miss something? What is this? Why did she get hit on the head And then I like looked for a mark on her face when she was doing the message, and I was like, I didn't understand why it was important. But now that you're saying it, I could see how that could be like, oh, this is the mount she's going to take to go rescue Doma.
Because she does cover a fair amount of distance to get into the city from where they were.
I think she changes what she was going to say.
You think
Yeah,
so?
The
same.
mount.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that she was going to just kind of say, hey, everything sucks right now. And then she runs into the horse.
And then she's like, I could
She's like,
go.
oh,
Okay.
everything sucks right now. And also bite me. Like, I'm going to go save Doma.
Well, I love the widow's response. I love the whole rescue scene getting Doma, but I also, more than that, loved Xiaolin's response to it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
her final statement of good girl. Like I loved that. Just, beautiful. But also I didn't feel like the widow was overtly betraying Xiaolin. She's just going in to save one person, like don't feel so bad.
I know, I kind of felt that as well. Like, it's going in and rescuing her, and like kind of inadvertently by circumstance, kind of well, he ultimately didn't save the president, but it only slightly messed up anybody's plans, really.
So one thing that I think is interesting about this series is, and this happens a lot with a lot of not major Marvel and DC comics. I think that there's actual peril in here. When the train was headed towards the tower, I was like, oh, the president and Doma are going to die.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then when they narrowly escape, I'm like, well, okay, that's cool. But I actually had that feeling that they were in danger. And now I'm starting to wonder, like, did the president die when she was burned?
Well, it's comic books and we didn't see the death, so don't trust it.
Yeah, are you
Everybody who
saying the
dies,
death
it's,
of death in comics was the death of Superman?
I mean, I would hope that people could come back to life because we've kind of skipped the most important death in this book.
Oh God, you're right.
And I was making a face earlier on because I was looking back on that page to realize like what his last thing he said.
Woof.
Woof question mark.
Oh God.
That
Do
I
your
think,
worst. Ugh.
If I'm gonna go the opposite direction of my complaining before, like the power to make you care that much about a robot dog is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, I found some. I found the the inspiration for the pooping bombs that it put out from
V3?
We Three. Yeah, did we
Yeah.
talk about that then? Okay.
I think we had. It was
It's
my
funny, I
first
read
thought
that
as well.
since then, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But
That's-
that, like, even that, like, why did that make me like that creature? But it did.
Cloacas, man.
Dog
There's
shapes.
something.
It didn't
Something
make me
you
like
really
the
can't-
cat in D3 or in We Three, but it made me like him.
It is bananas. That scene is bananas. Just like when he says, do your worst. Oh man,
Really
and you
does.
see the dog and you're like, no, it's so much worse than the colloquialism of do your worst. Like it actually was the worst thing. I read this in the shop today between doing a bunch of stuff, and I finished this issue. I was like, well, fuck this. I like put it down and just went and did other stuff and tried to put it out of my memory because that shot is so devastating.
Right.
Yeah.
The blue and the red.
Yeah. It's when you see the blue and you're like, oh no, that's not just he's broken. He's
Oh.
but
Oh.
well, and it was that sequence that I realized how it, because you see him pointing the gun, taking up most of the panel, and then there's the panel of woof, and then he
Yeah.
fires
Mhm.
because it might actually be that he can't fire it unless someone asks a question.
Well, actually, I think that it's a woof exclamation mark.
No. No. It is.
I went into this like not wanting the ranger to die, and then when the dog
Oh, it
died,
is. My
I
bad.
was like, fuck that guy. Like I didn't care about
Yeah.
the ranger anymore.
It's just
at
the
all
dog.
lying there. I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. He's hurt. Who cares? And then I'm looking at the body of the dead robot dog, and I'm just devastated.
Ugh.
So who would you like to be least in this book? For me, I think it's probably Ezra because he just keeps getting dragged around and messed up and like.
Bell.
Bell.
that's what I meant. That's what I meant. Bell. Yeah.
Bell and
Yeah,
his
just
cancerous psychic spirit Cheveo. Just like, oh, get out of my head.
Which, like, they're the two characters I kind of relate to. Like, I like both of those characters, but
I do
yeah,
too.
they're really having a rough time of it. Bell.
It's like a 90s sitcom of two people forced to live in a space that's just too small for both of them.
Yeah.
I can tell you who I'd most like to be in this volume.
Who?
Death in Babylon, because they're in one panel and they're having a great time.
Yeah.
Skipping
Oh.
rocks.
Buddy life. Yeah, no, the narration and the way that the issue was told about like the conversation with Wolf and Crow about like why do you burn, you know, folks, and then the way that narration comes back in, like it's sort of, it's a square bit of that text that kind of goes into a scene that wasn't even related to it at all. It's, you know, you're seeing the beginning of it and you're like, oh right, that this issue started with that conversation.
Yeah, it
And-
goes from the death of a leader who was relatively well respected by his nation to the death of the president chick, and like she goes out pretty much exactly how she earned it.
You know, though, for her, because she wasn't the first one to die like that, essentially, but she uses phrasing at some point here that says, I think she's quoting the word. She says, "The fields of flame, a cleansing of the world. A voice cries out, let chaos reign, and the weak be the first to fall." And I took a picture of that, being like, "Oh, they're quoting herself for her getting burned, but she wasn't even the first to fall," and that seems different than what I would have expected.
Yeah, and that it ties in with, you know, this kind of question you're always going to have with Apocalypse is you know, is it a suffering final apocalypse, or is it a refreshing apocalypse? Is it death as a ultimate consequence, or is it death as a part of a cycle of renewal?
Or yeah, is it like the death of the shitty leaders?
Right.
Well, then the Texas Ranger would be the winner, right?
Maybe, or maybe some of the rabble.
My favorite white page narration Hickmanism yet in this issue is the final issue when it says silence, flashes back to the silent issue, and then says, and then thunder. And I just love that, like, of course, yeah, there is silence and then thunder. And then I love but you know, even just that, the narrative hook of it was a silent issue to then do it was just like, oh, Hickman, you probably had that phrase when you did a silent issue, and it's part of why you made it a silent issue, you know, 2 years ago when this book was coming out.
Yeah.
And I loved how that issue opened with her completely nude, just badass, destroyed all these people, and then it ends with her fully armored, badass, ready to kill some people.
That shot reminded me of when Mike and Django pointed out the one issue that had the very like 90s Liefeld, and like this to me was like just Liefeld,
Yeah, that's
pouches, man.
Cover.
Yeah,
all those pouches.
Doma had a lot of pouches in that previous issue too.
I didn't even notice the pouches.
Dude,
Yeah.
pouched up.
Because normally they're using every excuse to show off her abs, but yeah, this is just pouch abs.
Yeah. Even more impressive than abs. There's 36 pouches there.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah,
Django,
Sorry, Nathan, please.
Django, you're on record with saying that someday Hickman's going to tie everything he's ever done together, and it's going to be absurd. But there's two pieces of evidence in this.
True.
And one, Archibald Chamberlain talks about, in a word, decorum, and then he explains on what that means, right? And then they say that do you see that they wrote 3 rules of the land in the Endless Nation, very similar to Krakoa. And in this one, it was never forsake the tribe, never take the life of one of the nation, and never walk the Mike Deadlands. But it's interesting to see the things that he chooses. Like, we make fun of things like, oh, go get the latest John Grisham novel, and it's like not different with different people, but like it is kind of comforting to know what you're getting when you sign up for a writer, and to know that, yeah, cool, he's going to create a thing and maybe give it 3 rules, or he's going to talk about the same vocabulary or the same white people. And it's interesting. This whole quarantine's been me basically reading Hickman. It's been this and some X-Men, and then the whole Avengers run. And it's been fine to read that all at the same time, and that surprised me. Credit to him.
Yeah.
My heart broke when Xiaolin received the note that said, "You missed my dear, look up if you dare." Like,
Oh yeah.
Whoa.
I just realized like how much I'm like, I think probably unintentionally rooting for Xiaolin the most as the person I like sort of most identify with, or I'm most, yeah. And that
This is a
page,
genius panel. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
But
Would
I
anyone
was
be willing
scared.
to call her the main character?
That's a good question. I wonder if that's why I identify with her the most. I mean, that
It
and
depends
I
on the
would-
volume.
I would
Chamberlain.
say that the main character, like the main protagonist or
movie.
ists, would be Death, Death's Bride, and Babylon.
Yeah.
And
And
Mhm.
I think Xiaolin is there for the everyman because she's not a horseman of the apocalypse and
And
Just
not
the
a
ruler
science
of a
baby.
nation.
not a science baby raised by robots. So,
And
you know, ultimately,
probably
yeah,
the
you're
most
going to put
relatable.
yourself in her position more than a lot of other characters.
Well, she's
Mhm.
also nice. Like
Yeah,
she's
she
not the
holds-
asshole leader that every other one of these
Mm.
people is.
Yeah,
the
like
old
the reason
conventional
why
moral
that's so devastating when Chamberlain does his counterstrike is her city is full of women and children.
Mhm.
Like those are who suffer because that failed is
And not only that,
for
but
people, and
refugees.
she's like you can see that she's destroyed by that. That's why like she was already angry, and like
And
this
when?
is just
This is
Yeah.
a face of somebody being destroyed by something, not the same
Mhm.
sneer that we've seen in every other panel in this series. Like that is somebody who is really not happy about the decision that they have to make at that moment.
Yeah, and like that entire volume leading up to that is pretty much from her or that issue, sorry, is like almost entirely from her perspective getting at Archibald, aside from the stuff with the widow. And
And the refugees are Chamberlains, right?
No, they're from
escaped
the-
Texas.
They're
I
from
would assume Texas.
Chamberlain is the like deep south, like Florida,
Oh, okay.
Georgia area, and then Texas is different.
Okay. Never mind then.
But and I think the fact that she cares is, yeah, you're right, the absolute hinge on that, because with Chamberlain in particular becomes her antithesis, because everything that happens around him he meets with, you know, a straight expression and a snarky comment. He does not care. Same with the president as well. Like she gets angry and stuff, but it's always a personal anger, and it's absolutely performed that she does not care about the people around her. And we see panels like that, and we know.
And like one thing I really love about this panel is that one of the guards is actually smiling at the interaction. I'm just like, you can tell this is a thing that she does when they walk around, is she has these moments.
Because it's a communist utopia. So
one thing I love about Hickman is I think he's pretty open about like wearing his influences on his sleeve at times. Like he'll very openly like he was really into Leviathan's Wake, and some elements of that are through lines in his stories. And that particular issue had like real strong Game of Thrones vibes to me, with like just Khaleesi and what her role is as a new person of power, taking in refugees and this horrible attack, and like balancing, is it retribution or compassion? And that whole conversation I really liked. I know Hickman also likes Game of Thrones a lot. I'm sure he was, I'm sure there's an amount of that in that particular sequence there.
I want to address how wonderfully, going back with how there's so many callbacks in this, and how they're constantly shifting, like when the callback is happening, is we get the other half of the conversation that Chamberlain has with Xiaolin, where he beforehand is in like the first issue of this volume is talking to his niece about how like he's got to put on a front and say these particular things, and like, oh, he's talking about and he's got to goad someone. And then now we get to see, yes, that one. And now she's talking about how she has to put on this face and seem disappointed and tired, and how they're both trying to manipulate each other. I thought it was so brilliantly done.
In that same sequence where Chamberlain was speaking to his niece, I was like very prepared for inevitable feeling of his niece killing him, and like that was one future that I could see easily happening in the next like 2 volumes. Like, oh, he's bringing up somebody who's going to betray him because all he can do is teach betrayal.
Yeah, or
but
try to betray him and fail, or
yeah. And then her death, I thought was very sad and not what I had expected to
Is
happen
she
with her.
dead?
That's true. We don't know that she's dead. That's a good point.
She just says it hurts.
Yeah.
Bloody.
That it was a gut shot. That's not
Yeah,
going to be a
which-
fun time.
Yeah, genre-wise, gut shot and saying it hurts usually is followed by being carried into a hospital or something.
Yeah, and this volume did begin with a guy with like, it wasn't clear how he was wounded, but he was, dying slowly.
More swords that ting 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 open, please.
Oh.
I'm so into the
I
mechanics.
was having
of that.
some ultraviolet flashbacks.
Yeah.
God, I haven't seen that in a minute.
The blue-blooded, the most tragic page, right? Am I on
Yeah.
right correctly? But the Django mentioned the "I wish we were in a time of once," whatever that quote was. But
Love that.
Hickman is very on record of writing things that not only he cares about and thinks are cool, but matter. And holy crap, did the quote that says "justice is what the strong do to the weak" feel quite relevant.
Oh, that's on that page, and with that character who's all about justice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Just as it's-
even the whole sequence of the rebel leader talking to the masses was just like, oh man, this is something simpler, more primal. All my life I have felt a boot on my neck.
Yeah,
Oh.
that was a great speech.
Forgotten about the boot on my neck. That's
Yeah.
painful to read. Gosh.
Yeah, that was well written and relevant to the times, and surprising it happened immediately beforehand. And that was a very cathartic, like, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
It's like Go Comics. I know that's not what this is about in this sense, but like we are ultimately reading a comic and we do have our other things we care about. But man, like it's just really fun to read something like that where we're here to have a good time and whatever. But there's, I don't know, this stuff can matter and be a fun time all at once, and that's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's the great thing about any kind of art is it can matter as much as you want it to matter. You could read this and not try to draw parallels, but Hickman's writing just, it leaves the room for you to do that if you decide that that's what you want out of it.
That's a good point, but the renaming in this video chat is just and when's, I'm not sure if yours is supposed to say, Jalen, no choice but to stand, or if it cut off stand. But
no choice but to stand. I stand Jalen.
Yeah, I'm in it. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much. Next week, do you think next Monday would be a good Monday to do one of our volume 2s that we've been talking about? It sounded like people were interested in a Gideon Falls volume 2.
Will knows.
And I'm very into that.
I'll be reading that volume after we hang up this call regardless. So if we want to do it next week, that's great. But,
yeah, I am down for whatever everyone else wants to do, because I actually don't know if I will be here, because I have a thing right beforehand that I don't know what time it'll be over.
Good luck.
So I might be like jumping
in
like half an hour late or something. So
we'll leave the invitation open.
Yeah, it starts at 6, and I don't know if it's going to go 2 hours or longer.
Well,
we'll be here.
We'll be here. But okay, so in that case, let's plan Gideon Falls, because that seems to be the one that people have talked the most about, and then we'll get in for East of West, Volume 8. Volume
Gideon
10
Falls
will be out.
To fall harder.
Yeah. And I ordered volume 10s for everybody, so we'll have plenty of them when they come out, and then we'll have like a week and a half turnaround for the podcast. It'll be perfect. Any other notes, anybody?
Can I tell you something that got me really pumped to continue reading Gideon Falls?
Yeah.
On Bendis's off panel, I know this is starting like it's going to be irrelevant, but it is. He was talking about how people always call Jeff Lemire just to get Andrea Sorrentino's number.
Yeah.
Even though Jeff Lemire is a big deal. And I was like, dang, just hearing that from the industry, how well respected he is, was like, dang, I already liked it, but knowing that his peers and colleagues respect him so much, I was like,
respect Lemire or Sorrentino?
Sorrentino, for knowing as great as Lemire is, because Bendis had called Lemire to do some what's the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen DC thing? Not that. What is it?
Legion of
Superheroes.
Superheroes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I
He
thought
called
you were-
Lemire to do that, and when Lemire picked up, he was like, "Let me guess, you want Sorrentino's number?" And he was like, "No, I want you."
Bendis
so,
already
yeah.
had Sorrentino's number. At
Yeah,
that point.
Yeah. Anyway,
That's
Yes.
awesome.
that got
I
me
mean-
excited for it.
I
That team
mean-
is just incredible.
It is.
I mean, that's what you hear a lot about, like if someone's good to work with is if they do good work, if they are good to work with, and if
Punctual.
they do it on time. And it seems like Sorrentino, from what I know from hearing other people, does all three of those.
yeah.
Yeah.
Their time.
Really, you just want to
turnover is
be
amazing.
two of the three.
Two out of the three is all you need. Yeah.
I've seen Dave Stewart's name literally everywhere I look now too. Every like different volume I'm looking at on the website or just thinking about reading, and Dave Stewart's name is almost always there. It's pretty.
He is one of the three.
Sounds
Yeah, I
terrifying.
feel really bad. I
Blair.
cannot remember the one that you guys always talk about on the podcast.
Tamara
Bonvillain.
Bonvillain,
And then
Cameron
there's
or
one
Dave
other-
Stewart, and then
It's one other person.
you just
that
said it. Somebody else just said
Jordy
it.
Belair.
Oh, Jordy
Belair.
Belair.
Yeah.
Jordy Belair.
Okay, maybe
Hollingsworth,
there's another
Chris
person because I
Halloran.
feel like there's like another colorist. It's a dude. I feel like
Dean
he's
White.
When he
Timo
does
Mori?
Opeña.
White. That was it.
Oh, Dean White's my favorite.
I was
Dean
like, I
White's my
could not remember
favorite.
his name. I'm like, it's a color,
Yeah.
and that's all I can remember. I just
What are
remember,
we,
like,
a bunch
you
of
guys,
comics nerds talking about colorists?
Yeah, come on,
So like
get
his
out of
name
here.
comes up on the podcast a lot, and I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
And then after you mentioned him, I was like, oh yeah, he does like color a bunch of this stuff.
The good stuff. He's slow too. All right, everybody. Well, let's get out of here.
We'll see you on Monday.
Good
Thank you so much
night.
for
See
joining. We
everyone.
look forward to next
Guys.
week. Thank you.
Yes.